Hi everyone, how are you? Yeah, well it's still quite warm here, but I've been wanting to do this talk for a little while. Yeah, there's no playing in this one, so I should be doing a playing video in a few days, I should think. But I just wanted to get this one out. I've been thinking about this for a while, and it started to come to a head really. In the video I did about when I was comparing Whiplash with the Paper Chase. Saying that basically that Whiplash is kind of like it's like a semi remake of the Paper Chase, but for different games, and talking more about like a lot of the negatives that we've got in modern day culture and that sort of thing. And there's two points I want to pick up from the last video that I made as well. Where I was comparing the character of Nicole, who's sort of Andy's girlfriend in Whiplash, and Susan, who's Hart's girlfriend in The Paper Chase. Because there's this line in The Paper Chase where Hart says, "I need sustenance," and of course in Whiplash that's kind of echoed in the fact that Andy meets Nicole and she's working in a cinema, movie theatre, whatever you want to call it, and she's selling popcorn and cola and all that kind of sort of junk food type things. And then even on the first date they go for a pizza, which is also interesting because in Paper Chase, Hart first meets Susan. He's bought a pizza and he walks Susan home because apparently there's some creepy guy following her back. Yes, so there's some creepy guy who's been following her, and she thinks that Hart will protect her from that. Yes, it's just some way of introducing her into the plot, basically. But if you've seen Whiplash, there are some mild spoilers, so I do apologise for those. There's the bit where Andy he gets kicked out of the Schaefer Jazz School for basically attacking Fletcher, who's played brilliantly by J.K. Simmons. I mean, they're both playing really well in this film. But there's a scene like where after Andy's dropped out of college and he's just walking around the street and he has this big slice of pizza, and then he goes in this jazz bar and he sees Fletcher. He's playing the piano, tonight. Special performance, Terence Fisher. So it's not Fisher, Fletcher, Terence Fletcher, and so I think this whole thing about the sustenance idea that also carries over, because like in that sort of when they meet up again in that bar, in a way, Fletcher is still playing regular gigs, but it's kind of like a step down. He's not playing like sort of great big amphitheatres and stadiums and whatnot. He's playing in a pub. So that's part of it. But I think Andy's still got like stars in his eyes, and so then Fletcher's talking about this whole thing about like looking, pushing people to be to be the best they can, and we're looking to find this is whole speech about the whole thing about good job being a way of depriving the world of the next Charlie Parker or Louis Armstrong. And I think that's the problem. I think that's the logical fallacy, the straw man, or the false belief that Fletcher actually has. And some of this follows from, I haven't actually got copies of them, but I was watching online actually. There's a 3-part BBC documentary called Jazz Britannia, which is about like the history of jazz in basically in Britain, but mainly focusing on like the London jazz scene. How like in the post-war era it was kind of it was a sort of trad jazz type stuff, and then you were getting people like Johnny Dankworth, and then you got Ronnie Scott's Club was coming out of that, and then it's sort of like around the 70s. Around the 60s, there was all like the British blues explosion, and the jazz rock music was coming in, But which would mean that by like the mid-70s, jazz was sort of middle-aged, or even like old man music. Nobody was taking it seriously, and it's only after things like in the 80s you had like the modern ska movements that there was like a jazz revival was coming from that, especially in London. And then you started having players like Courtney Pine were coming forward. He was trying to emulate people like Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, and there's lots of people who were criticising, they were criticising Courtney Pine, saying that he didn't have the technique to do what he was reaching for. But I mean, but the thing was, fair play to the fella. He actually kick-started a whole new movement, right? So then, then like it's sort of like in like the third movement of this sort of Jazz Britannia. He's talking about how jazz and like sort of 80s soul music, and that's almost sort of revived jazz. But alongside it, there was, apart from Courtney Pine and a few others, there was in America, like in New York, there was Winston Marsalis. Is that how you pronounce his name? Marsalis? Yeah. And he made that bold statement about jazz being America's classical music. Now that is a very bold statement to make. But the thing is then that it sort of, that rather than this sort of movement which sort of like allows, you could take it in almost any direction and mix it with other genres like rock and blues and soul. It was becoming this thing that almost like you're putting it on a pedestal. And I'm trying not to quote that Oscar Wilde thing about all art being quite useless. You could forgive a man if he bows down and worships a piece of art. I think there's something along those lines. You might want to correct me in the comments, but this that's the problem, that this whole thing about in Whiplash, where Fletcher is looking for the next Charlie Parker, and he's never going to find it, because Charlie Parker belonged to a different era. That whenever any new artist or art form comes along, it has this thing called zeitgeist, or zeitgeist, this thing like the spirit of the times, which is where you're sort of tapping into everything that's going on, and you're bringing that together with that and that and that, and you're going, right, yeah, and then we're going to build something out of that, and we're making this, and this is our direction, and up yours if you don't get what we're doing, and that's pretty much how it's been. Of course, like getting back to those Jazz Britannia documentaries. I mean, that was 2005, and very good if you get a chance to watch them. Please do. But that was 2005, so that's 18 years ago. So when that sort of new British jazz revival stuff was going on, that was like almost 40 years ago. In which case, the people who grew up with that movement are now a similar age to that, that generation that. We're being called passé during the Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club, and of course, actually even in the 90s, you were getting things like the Fast Show, that whole, hi, welcome to Jazz Club, nice, great, and all that sort of thing. So we got this problem about like music almost becoming a parody of itself. I mean, like, I don't think jazz has actually had its equivalent of Spinal Tap. But then again, maybe it doesn't need to, because it's become so insular, and I don't know if you can actually move it forward that much. I mean, like, say for example, somebody like me, or like some other guitar. I mean, most of my followers are guitarists, but like, say somebody like Alan Holdsworth. You put him in Fletcher's jazz class, and he's not gonna be in there very long, because he doesn't fit that mould. And also, I mean, there was this other thing like with, I mean, I've heard this sort of quote a couple of times by Aldemila when he first joined Chick Corea's band. You know, they were playing this gig, and then you know, and everybody's sort of cheering away, and then Al plays this. I think he plays something by is it the Allman Brothers or something like that. And then after the gig, like Chick Corea takes him aside and he says, "What was that you were doing?" And so he tells him, and he said, "Well, don't do it again. We're a fusion band." But the thing is, though, you know, you're a fusion band. Well, that means that like you're rock and you're you're either rock or you're jazz. But if you're fusion, aren't you something new? You know, and the moment you start bringing something new, but pulling it back into the old, it's not new anymore. It's not groundbreaking enough. You know. And then there's something else. I've been watching a couple of things with Tony Iommi, and and the whole thing about like losing his fingers and whatnot, and sort of playing in playing with Jethro Tull for a while and doing in that Rolling Stones rock and roll circus and whatnot, but ending up doing the Black Sabbath thing, and it seemed odd to think that they were once like a six-piece rhythm and blues sort of almost overlapping with jazz, because they had like saxophones in the group, and yet they pared it down to just like the four of them, and then created this unique sound of their own, which had that sort of like, if you listen to it, it has like it has some jazz elements to it, like playing in 6/8 and whatnot, and like some things in between the bass and the drums that's going on, and those big chords as well. And Tony Iommi was saying about like he was going for lessons, and then after a while he packed it in because he much preferred to be more self-taught, and then he realised that if he was being self-taught, he was finding his own direction, he was finding his own feet, and finding his own sound more importantly. And in so doing, bands like, well, I say Black Sabbath, but then there was lots of other bands around, like Led Zeppelin, which were sort of similar, but not really, So actually, I mean, I don't want this one to be too long, but getting back to this thing with the paper chase, I mean, like the difference between Kingsfield, who's the professor in the paper chase, and Fletcher, who's the the tutor in Whiplash. Kingsfield was doing this thing about Socratic method, where you might ask a question, but you never find a full answer. Each question is answered itself by another question, and another question, and another question, until it's questions all the way down. So surely as like a practicing musician, somebody who's striving to do something else, you're constantly asking yourself questions about what if I do this? Why am I limited on this? Why can't I try this as well? Why can't I mix this bit in here? There's this great Brazilian drumming technique over here. Why can't I link that in with this rock thing I'm doing? Or there's all those reggae guys from the 80s. Why can't I link what they're doing with what I'm doing now? Or alright, I mean, I listen to a fair bit of jazz or whatnot, but I also like alt music, and I also like bands like Portishead and stuff like that. So why can't I link in some of the ideas that Portishead were bringing into, why can't I bring like alt rock into that as well? Why, and so on, and then and I think just to close, I mean, part of it is like this Socratic method, because I also did a video about the sea interludes for Peter Grimes, about how they are so groundbreaking, and I was watching this interview with Benjamin Britten, and he was talking about his approach to writing, where basically like from day one he just basically just either sit or just get right near the piano with the librettist, the person who writes the text, and then the person who writes the text would read something out, not necessarily sing it, and then he'd play to what the person was reading out. So, you know, alright, I mean, you may find something like the opera of Peter Grimes, you may find it a bit dry and maybe a bit dull, but if you have another listen, you see there's a lot more interesting stuff going on. Like the opening bit, you know, where, you know, the judge, you know, he's passing judgment on Peter Grimes. And like the tone of voice that the judge is going through, from being really solemn to almost being sort of quite playful, that's reflected in what the orchestra's doing, and you get all these different voicings and all these different styles, and this is just all just come out of just you know, Benjamin Britten just sitting at the piano saying, right, well, we'll have these chords here, and perhaps not even thinking about what those chords were, you know. And so, you know, rather than thinking, you know, like stuck in the past, you know, where like in the 50s they didn't necessarily have the same recording stuff, you know, they certainly didn't have like video cameras like this or YouTube, but you could just sit down, sketch out some ideas, and you could take it in a new direction. You know, why should you be sort of like paying lip service to something that was happening, you know, what, 60, 70 years ago, and not veering from it, you know, setting that down as if it's some sort of catechism? You know, why do that, you know? So I think, yeah, so really, you know, this is something that, you know, I just wanted to say, you know, pretty much, you know, that the big problem I've had with jazz, and actually a lot of genre-based music as well, is the fact that it's limited, that you are fixed there. You know, you might say, oh yeah, we're independent musicians, but you're not going to veer that far away from a specific style because of the way that everybody is programmed, or, you know, I don't want to use a stronger word like brainwashing, but programmed to listen to a fixed style, you know, rather than just exploring, you know, and you know, thinking, like using that Socratic method, you know, like answering a question with another question, and so on and so on, until you start bringing new things in there, or critiquing what you're doing. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave it there. I didn't want this to be too long, but yeah, please comment below with your thoughts, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.